Here's an overview of the surprising similarities between the French and German languages. Both the French and German languages have a plethora of structural similarities in their grammars, and as a speaker of both French and German, I thought it might be neat to point them out. After all, these two languages are from neighboring countries that share a border. This video is in English and primarily intended for native English speakers who are learning either French or German or both, though native German or French speakers who are not native English speakers should still be able to follow along and get the gist of things and comprehend the main idea of the important points by just looking at the examples provided. Feel free to pause the video at any time to examine the examples in as much depth as needed. That way, if one is not interested in a particular example, no time is wasted in going in extreme depth for each and all of them provided. So let's start from the very beginning. Most sentences in just about any language start with a pronoun of some sort. The first interesting thing to note is that the pronoun structures in French and German are similar, with 6 conjugation classes in total. Notice how there is both a plural you and formal you in addition to the standard informal singular you in both French and German, with specific verbs in both languages signifying the usage of informal or formal you. These concepts, of course, do not exist in English. The next most important word in a sentence besides a pronoun is the verb. We start with the infinitive form. All infinitive verbs in both French and German have 3 types of fixed ending patterns. Notice the structural similarity. Now we start looking at the present tense conjugation patterns for verbs that are not used as auxiliary/modal verbs. More on this later. Once again, notice the structural similarity of the verb conjugation ending patterns between both languages. Interestingly, the present tense verb conjugation patterns for the standard most common auxiliary copular verbs to be and to have in both languages are irregular but in somewhat similar ways. For the rest of the modal/auxiliary verbs, the conjugation patterns are predictable within the context of their respective language, but what's most noteworthy is that they exist with corresponding equivalents in both languages. I think the most striking similarity between French and German grammar is how similar the structure is of using auxiliary verbs to describe events that happened in the past. Let's examine the above example dialogue in all 3 languages. In English, we have in the perfect tense, have you eaten dinner yet? Did you eat dinner? And in the perfect tense, we have a response, yes, I already ate dinner, / I have already eaten dinner. In German, we have, hast du schon Abendessen gegessen? And in response, we have in the perfect tense, ja, habe ich schon Abendessen gegessen. In French, we have in the passé composé, as-tu déjà mangé le dîner? And we have a response also in the passé composé, oui, j'ai déjà mangé le dîner. Notice how the past tense is similarly formed in all 3 languages. We have an auxiliary verb, which in this case is to have /haben/avoir, eventually followed by a past participle, which in this case is eaten, gegessen/manger. Additionally, notice the flipping of the order of the auxiliary verb and pronoun in the past interrogative structure in all 3 languages. It's basically more or less the same thing with the past perfect in addition to the perfect tense. Notice how we use some sort of past tense conjugation of the auxiliary verb in all 3 languages, which in this case is to have/haben/avoir. Now here's what I think specifically is the most striking similarity between French and German. If we are using the perfect/past perfect tense in either German or French with specific change of state verbs/verbs of action or motion, instead of to have/haben/avoir as the auxiliary verb in the sentence, we use to be/sein/être, which is a grammatical concept that does not exist in English, only in German and French, as can be seen above in the examples. In English, we have in the perfect tense, have you gone to the supermarket yet? Where the auxiliary verb is have, and the past participle is gone. And in the perfect tense, we have a response, yes, I have already gone to the supermarket. And in the past perfect, we have, yes, I had already gone to and stopped by the supermarket before I arrived. And once again, the auxiliary verb is have, and the past participle is gone. In German, we have in the perfect, bist du schon in den Supermarkt gegangen? And we have a response also in the perfect, ja, bin ich schon in den Supermarkt gegangen. And we could also have in the Plusquamperfekt, ja, wo ich angekommen bin, war ich schon in den Supermarkt gegangen. Notice how the auxiliary verb in the German sentences use sein instead of haben, and the past participle is gegangen. That is because gehen is a change of state verb. And in French, we have in the passé composé, es-tu déjà allé au supermarché? And in response, we have in the passé composé, oui, je suis déjà allé au supermarché. Or it could be in the plus que parfait, oui, avant que je sois venu, je suis déjà allé au supermarché. And notice how the auxiliary verb here is être, and the past participle is aller. And notice how the auxiliary verb is être instead of avoir, because aller is a change of state verb. In French, the specific list of verbs that use être as an auxiliary verb in the passé composé can be easily memorized with the mnemonic Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp, in and out of the house verbs maison d'être verbs as indicated above. There is no such equivalent list for the verbs that use sein as an auxiliary verb in the perfect in German, but the categories or types of verbs remain similar across both languages, specifically change of state verbs / verbs of action or motion. Notice how the perfect / past perfect tense construction always in the previous examples used a past participle of a verb. Interestingly, all three languages have a set basic format for converting an infinitive verb form into its past participle, as can be seen above. English, German, and French all do have simple past tense constructions that do not incorporate an auxiliary verb. Though this is commonly used in English, this structure is generally reserved for only formal written texts in both French and German, except for, of course, when using the commonly recurring set few auxiliary copula modal verbs. In addition to the past tense construction in all three languages, auxiliary verbs are also helpful in all three languages in describing conditional events, events in the future, or denoting events in passive voice. Notice the similarity of the structure between all three languages, utilizing the set few standard common conjugated auxiliary / modal / copula verbs combined with other verbs of infinitive or past participle forms. I know I'm supposed to be focusing on the similarities between French and German, but this is interesting enough to point out. The subjunctive mood really only exists in French and English. Conjunctive eins and conjunctive zwei from German are not really used the same way as the subjunctive mood in French and English. Conjunctive eins is mainly used to quote others with indirect discourse as shown in the example, and the usage of conjunctive zwei is more or less semantically equivalent to the conditional tense in English and French, and is semantically somewhat redundant and equivalent to the more colloquially used, previously mentioned German conditional structure involving the auxiliary verb werden, as can be seen in the example. Interestingly enough, the subjunctive structure for idiomatically wishing for or for commanding things volitionally remains in all three languages, as seen in the examples above. Though the present progressive tense is expressed equivalently and ambiguously as simple present tense in both French and German, gerund forms of verbs do exist in both languages, but with different usages, which is best illustrated with the examples above. In both French and German, there exists an imperative verb tense conjugation that is different and separate from the present tense conjugation. In English, not only is the imperative verb form not distinguishable from the present tense conjugation, but there is further no conjugation difference between singular you and plural you, which indeed does exist in both French and German, even in the imperative form. Both French and German have unique reflexive verb construction patterns that are somewhat different from English. However, notice how the examples in the English translation tend to sound a bit off or unnatural with the reflexive format structure, whereas this reflexive format is indeed a valid / the proper structure to be used in French and German. Interestingly and significantly so, there are quite a few idiomatic verb constructions that are equivalent in both French and German. The first example is the equivalent idiomatic usage of fehlen, manquer, to be missing, and plaire, gefallen / be pleasing, where the agent and patient is switched. The second example of this is the distinction in the usage of savoir versus connaître in French and the equivalent usage of wissen / kennen in German, respectively, corresponding to know a fact rather than be familiar with something / someone. Additionally, knowing how to do something is more aptly represented with the potential form in both French and German. A third example is the idiomatic verb structure of there is / il y a / es gibt, which in all three languages denotes the existence of something. A fourth example is the idiomatic usage of to let / laisser / lassen in all three languages. Literally, the verb means to release / leave / let go of something, but idiomatically in all three languages, it can be used to signify that something is allowed or made to happen, or that something is free to or bound to eventually happen on its own. French already has a first-person plural imperative verb form, so laisser is not used in this context, but German and English do not have this verb form, and these kinds of commands, in the setting of a group that one is in, must be constructed using the verb to let / lassen. Interestingly enough, idiomatically in both French and German, and not in English, one says that one, quote-unquote, has hunger / has fear / has thirst, quote, rather than saying one is hungry / is scared / is thirsty. And coincidentally, for all three languages, we go back to normal when one says one is tired, rather than saying one has fatigue. Now, enough on verbs. Let's talk about other parts of the sentence like nouns, articles, and adjectives. Coincidentally enough, unlike English, in both French and German, one must make sure all nouns, adjectives, and articles are declined in agreement and in accordance with one another based off of gender and number in both French and German. And for German specifically in particular, these words must be declined in agreement with even their overall function in the sentence, in addition to both gender and number. I am leaving out the details of how to do this because the purpose of this video is not to actually teach the languages, but rather just to quickly provide a brief overview and demonstrate the unique and surprising overarching big picture similarities between the structure of the French language and the German language. Though French nouns/adjectives/articles do not need to agree with their overall placement or function in the sentence, this concept can be seen in the case of relative clause construction using relative pronouns, which works similarly in German as well. The proper choice of relative pronoun depends on the relative pronoun's function in the relative clause, as can be seen in the above examples. In addition to quite a plethora of grammatical structural similarities, surprisingly enough, French and German and English share a lot of common similar vocabulary. I have provided a comparative list of self-explanatory examples, which should clearly illustrate the similarity between the words in French and in German. I have divided/sorted the list into nouns, adjectives, and verbs. This list is, of course, by no means complete nor comprehensive, but it provides you with the big picture perspective of the similarity of the mutually shared vocabulary among these languages. In conclusion, there is more similarity between the French and German languages than one might expect. Many grammatical structures are resemblant of each other correspondingly in both languages, and both languages share a lot of mutual vocabulary. Therefore, already knowing one of the two might help you learn the other down the road, and without any prior knowledge of these languages, learning them both together simultaneously at the same time might be conducive to facilitating the learning process. Thanks for watching. Merci. Danke.